All right, let me know when you see my screen.
I can see it.
You can see it, great. So I'm just going to run through a few things as I tell my story. You know, back in 2002, life was good. I had just moved back to the U.S. from. I had been living in Europe for 2 years as a software executive representing global software companies, and moved back to the U.S. and was doing consulting, which was uh, uh, very successful. And I also did a lot of charity work. I would donate platelets for kids with leukemia. Was one of the things I did, was going into the Red Cross every month and donating platelets, blood products, and things to kids with leukemia. And that was all I knew about leukemia at the time. But about a year after I was back in the States, I went in for my monthly donation, and they noticed something wrong with my blood. Um, and within a week, I was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. So if they wouldn't have flagged my blood in that Red Cross um, visit, who knows how further advanced my leukemia had gotten. Unfortunately, my leukemia was so far advanced when I was diagnosed that the doctors only gave me a few days to live without emergency immediate treatment. So literally, I think I was diagnosed on a 4 o'clock in the afternoon on one day, and by 8 o'clock the next morning, I was checking into Stanford Medical Center for emergency ablative treatment. Um, I quickly
Wow.
learned a lot of things about sort of how important it is to advocate for yourself. I think just within a few days of me being going into Stanford Hospital, um, there was one time when I think something didn't get written down in the chart, and somehow I was given a double dose of a medication, and the double dose caused cardiac arrest. So I went into code blue, and my heart stopped, and it was a whole big thing. And anyway, obviously that could have been avoided, but it was just it was so important for me to start taking charge of my medicine. And I learned that really the hard way over the next 6 months. Essentially, because of the nature of my disease, they had to essentially uh, kill me. I mean, kill all my blood and bone marrow every month with an ablative chemotherapy regimen of one kind or another, and then see how the leukemia responded, and if I recovered without the leukemia, great. But really, what it came down to was that no amount of radiation or chemo was going to cure my disease or ever had cured anybody with Philadelphia chromosome positive ALL. So after you know
Wow.
6 or 8 months, um, unfortunately, Stanford just said we're done with our protocol. There's really nothing else that we can do, and we're arranging hospice care for you. And I know I was flabbergasted. I said, well, wait a minute, wasn't the whole purpose of all the grueling treatments I've been on the last 8 months, wasn't the purpose of this to cure me? And they said, well, these were just experimental protocols, but really what it came down to, and I learned that in the future, was that no, those treatments really never had any chance of curing me, but there wasn't anything else they could actually offer me at that medical center. So really, they just offered me whatever trials or protocols they had. And I just thought, this, wait a minute, where is, anyway, I was under the wrong assumptions about our medical system, and then how I guess I assumed that, of course the medical professionals would take the time to research what would be best for each patient and things like that. But the bottom line is, that's just really not done in our system. Medical
Is that about
professionals.
healing people, not making money?
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
there's no
No.
compensation in our system for really doing research and finding the optimal treatment for a patient. As a matter of fact, the incentives are opposite, because if a certain medical center or medical professional did that, then most often they might be referring all their patients somewhere else where that individual patient might have an optimal treatment for that patient. So what they do is they have to, it's kind of like HMOs. They sort of group people into categories, figure out what the best standard of care is they can offer to the majority of people within that population, and sort of and also what's going to be uh, financially feasible enough to sustain. And so that's, they sort of have a standard of care protocol that they do. If you don't fall within that standard of care protocol, or if that standard of care protocol is not ideal for you, then you fall outside the norm, and nobody's going to really go out of their way to figure it out for you. I think is really what it comes down to. And that advocating for yourself, even with just simple medical diagnoses or simple health issues, or maybe even more normal health issues, is just as important for if you're given a terminal diagnosis for cancer. It's really, it's really up to you to make the decisions moving forward that are going to be best for you, to either source the right information or source the right assistance in figuring out what the optimal treatment path for you will be. So, again, after 8 months of treatment at Stanford, I was essentially sent home to die. And so, it was luck of the draw that I happened to have a half sister that I had only met. I was adopted, and I only met my half sister a couple years before. And it turns out she's a physician and worked at the Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center in Seattle. So she went to the head doctors up there, the head administrators, and said, "Hey, my brother is being sent home to die. Is there anything else we can do?" And she said, "I'll be the donor. I mean, I'll donate my stem cells or whatever I need to do." And they said, "Yeah, actually, we do have a couple of haploidentical transplant programs that he would qualify for." And so I packed up my whole life. I said goodbye to all the people that had been helping me down here. And I showed this picture here. The whole, in the meantime, during that first 6 months of treatment, the whole Silicon Valley community rallied to save my life. It was just absolutely amazing. I mean, I am a local kid. I went to the Los Gatos High School here in the Silicon Valley, and had a lot of, knew a lot of people in the area and everything. But when I got sick, the community really rallied, and they put up Save Our Eric banners everywhere and a Save Our Eric website. And we started the foundation, which is now called the WeHeal Foundation. And the first initiative of the foundation was to work with the Red Cross and the Rotary and a lot of other philanthropic organizations, and put on one of the largest bone marrow registration drives that I've ever heard being done. Now, this picture was actually taken in 2003 during that first 6 months of treatment at Stanford, obviously in between treatments, but right around the time that they were finishing the protocol and telling me that nothing else could be done. So anyway, yeah, it was very discouraging time, but also miracles kept happening. So there I was in Seattle. I went through 2 failed bone marrow transplants in Seattle, trying these experimental protocols, as well as another major chemo and radiation protocol. But unfortunately, nothing worked. And again, they said the only thing we can do is offer you hospice care. So it was really then that I had to dig deep and say, okay, look, I'm still not buying this. I'm a firm believer that there's a solution to every problem, and that if I haven't, and unless I've turned over every stone looking for a solution, then I haven't done everything I can do to figure out how to save my own life. And so I networked, I crowdsourced, and I networked with doctors. I said I had lived and worked in Europe for years. I had a list of high-level contacts, and I put out my case and asked to be introduced to the top hematologists and transplant doctors in those countries. And within a week of me doing my sort of international crowdsource for a solution, I found the treatment that I should have had from the very beginning. And it was very, very simple. It was that there was no way, because I was adopted and because of idiosyncrasies in my DNA, that I was going to find a match for a bone marrow transplant. But at the same time, the only thing that could possibly save me was, essentially I had a cancer of my immune system. And how do you kill somebody's immune system without killing the patient? Well, you can't really. I mean, in essence, your immune system is part of you. And in order to cure this type of cancer of your immune system, you need to essentially kill the patient and then bring them back with a new system. And the only way to do that is to find a source of stem cells from hematopoietic or blood and bone marrow stem cells from another human being. Well, bone marrow wasn't an option. So the only other option was the umbilical cords from newborn babies. Problem with that is they had tried it for 10 years, and every experiment they tried had failed. And so in the US, they were just basically giving up and saying it didn't work. Whereas the doctors I spoke to in Europe were saying, no, we figured out that this was literally a volume issue, that one little baby's umbilical cord blood is not enough to seed an adult body. But if you use 2 or 3 umbilical cord sets of stem cells, that it worked great. And so I immediately contacted several hospitals in the US that were offering a multiple umbilical cord stem cell transplant experimental treatment. And, I was riding the wave of the cusp of new technology. So really, I decided to go to Minnesota, University of Minnesota Transplant Center, because I would be patient number 3 there, whereas the only other hospital, which was Duke, I would have been the first patient. And I thought, well, maybe I'll be patient number 3 instead of number 1. And so packed up my life again. By now I'm going on 2 years of very, grueling treatment in and out of, multi-week long stays in hospitals and things. But here it is. And this is the picture back in July 23rd, 2004, when I received the stem cells from a little baby girl. They found the stem cells, as you mentioned, in a cryobank in Milan, Italy, and they had been frozen for 8 years. And those are the cells right there in that photo that are now living in me and are serving. They're my new bone marrow and blood system. So my blood is now that of a baby girl. Well, now a 15-year-old baby girl, or a 16-year-old baby girl. So after this day, on July 23rd of 2004, the picture on the right is the first time. I essentially went into what I call a transplant coma. I was so sick. My body was just an empty shell. I had no blood system, immune system. I was living in a bubble. Nobody could see me unless they were, masked and gowned and taped up and everything like that. I couldn't have any exposure to the outside world. So I was essentially, I think this was the first time I actually stood up out of bed for the first time since that transplant. So, it was pretty much finding a needle in a haystack. And it was, I send that message to everybody that there's always hope. Don't ever give up looking for a solution, even if everybody, like me, every doctor, every medical center in the country said nothing could be done. And yet that wasn't the case. The story, my story really, I guess, reached out into the national media for several reasons. One was really the identity theft, as you said, finding a hospital worker that was stealing patients' identities and catching them and prosecuting a HIPAA violation. But we're not going to talk too much about that. But it gave me a platform to really start talking about medical advocacy and the stem cells. And I think when I got on to the Montel show, all he wanted to talk about was the stem cells and the technology and how thousands of patients out there are dying that could be saved if we just focused on these biological therapies that are available. So again, the media, they did feature stories and all types of things. The foundation now, we're talking in the realm of 7, 8, 9, and 10. We hosted great events, including a walkathon, community barbecues, all-day concerts, things like that. And we did a lot of things for patients along the way. We were sort of a caring bridge and a GoFundMe for a long time, so patients could raise money for their own causes. But again, other crowdfunding sites came out, and so the foundation had to evolve. And it was really back in 2016, 4 years ago, that really the essence of what saved my life became the the mission and the vision of the foundation, and that is really crowd healing. Crowd healing is just a term that I use for crowdsourcing medical solutions, and it really has to do with finding all kinds of resources, information, things like that, and being able to crowdsource solutions for your disease. So anyway, that just sort of, underscores where we're at. A lot of the content and value that the foundation has provided over the years is still available there. The Patient Strategy and Resource Center, et cetera, et cetera. So the crowd healing is expanded now into basically offering. Well, here I'm gonna change my my sharing here to where is the, just a moment. I don't know where it happened to it. I had the website up, but let's see if I can. Pardon me for just a moment. I'm going to close this and see if you. Anyway, I was going to just show you the WeHeal Foundation, but that's okay. Let's see. I'm going to stop sharing now, and just talk to you about it. But on the WeHeal.org website, you can essentially go there, and there's over 650 different medical topic and advocate communities where you can ask questions and engage people. We actually will source various advocate resources for you depending on your disease and what questions and issues you're having. So I encourage everybody to go there and utilize that as a resource to find the optimal solutions for your diagnosis or your health condition that you're struggling with. So that's sort of my story in a nutshell. If you go ahead, was you going to make a comment?
Yeah, I was going to ask you something about the bone marrow. So you said you found out because of idiosyncrasies in your DNA that the bone marrow was not going to work. Was this after the drives? Where people had
well, no, this was found out ahead of time. So very early in my diagnosis, they did HLA typing, and they matched that typing with the National Marrow Donor Program's database on bone marrow donors. And at that time, it was very difficult for some ethnicities to find bone marrow matches, but generally not for a Caucasian American. Oh, thank you for putting that up. If you go to find a disease or topic, you can see and scroll down. You can see the list of all the topic and disease communities we have there. But yeah, there's over 600 topics of all kinds, and some are there's quite a bit of activity and posts and sharing and information in those. But essentially, they knew very early on in my diagnosis that finding a bone marrow match for me was not going to be an option. The experimental protocols I did in Seattle were with a half brother and half sister, and those were only experiments to see if maybe that would work. And obviously they didn't. But yeah, there you go. That was the disease I had. So
wow.
Yeah.
It's just, my story really just underscores the importance of how important it is to advocate for yourself, to become the captain of your own ship with regard to your medical treatment.
Hi, Erica. This is Mike. I have 2 questions for you. Well, first of all, I want to say that your story is inspiring.
Thank you.
I'm sure you've heard many times, but it's really, it just makes me feel positive that an individual, who may not have, the access to like high levels of resources or a specific set of expertise can still navigate, the fraught industry and landscape of healthcare, because, sometimes it's just really difficult to do that. But my question is this, if you were blessed to have a sister who obviously was like really, well informed about, your particular case and, options within your case, or at least having access to people she could talk to, what do you suggest for people who don't have those types of relationships? I know your website is one resource, but are there other, things that?
Yeah, there's. Thank you, Michael, for bringing that up. First of all, I want to point out that although that was an incredible resource and it gave me something to transition from being sent home to die into, you know, there was hope still somewhere. Those treatments that my sister was involved in the medical center that she was involved in, didn't work and didn't actually save my life or you know, cure my disease. It was the crowdsourcing of the solution
Right.
after that did. But you know, there are lots of resources out there now that were not available back in 2003 when I was initially struggling. There are cancer advocate organizations out there that will do free clinical trial consultations. As a matter of fact, depending on the type of disease, for example, for now a blood, bone marrow, or lymphoma, blood, bone marrow cancer, or lymphoma, I can arrange consultations with 4 or 5 different organizations, redundant consultations that you can match together and say, okay, well, if 4 or 5 people are saying this is the right way to go, or a combination therapy that combines, you know, the latest immune therapies and very, very low dose targeted chemos and these types of things would be the, an optimal, potentially an optimal solution for me, then you know you're on the right path. And so WeHeal is all about accessing those resources and people sharing information with one another about what they found worked for them, and bringing people together. So I think it is very important just to know that you're never alone. There's a whole community, global network of people out there that are struggling with the same health issues you are, and that there's help out there. And whether we have those resources available immediately on WeHeal or not, we will help you find them. So
Great, thank you.
Yeah, that's amazing. I was just gonna say, I think this is wonderful work that you're doing, you know, and it's very ambitious, trying to make these types of clinical trials and treatments accessible, or get people connected. It seems like you're trying to create like the Wikipedia of medical treatments or something, you know.
Right. Yeah, we're not a WebMD, and we don't really keep a database of treatments or trials. It's more about, you know, and this is really what you know, back in 2005 when we transitioned from being a foundation that helped, you know, specific types of leukemia patients into helping all patients with every diagnosis, it's really not about the disease, it's about the patient. It's about the strategy and the ways of thinking, and you know, I'll touch base on a few of the things that really, you know, found were important back in that time when we decided to become not a leukemia foundation or even cancer foundation, but a patient advocate foundation. And really, you know, there's all types of strategies that people need to be aware of when fighting a serious or terminal illness, or even an illness that's a chronic disease that could really affect their life. And that is really establishing the roles of who's going to be the advocate, who's going to be the caregiver, who's got the resources to function as in those roles. Sometimes the patient, in my case, the patient and the advocate were the same person. You know, the advocate being the person who does the research, figures out what, what would be optimal, and decides on a treatment path or something like that. That would be more of an advocate role. Sometimes the advocate is a spouse or a brother or a sister or somebody with a medical background in the family. But a caregiver is, you know, in my case, even though I was engaged and even married to my significant other, my mother was my caregiver. You know, she was the one that traveled with me to the different hospitals, who was, you know, made sure I got up in the morning and ate breakfast and took my medicines, and, you know, drove me back and forth to the hospital when I couldn't walk, and, you know, all those types of things. And then my significant other was there more of as an emotional support for me, and also a release from that medical grind. In other words, we would, whenever I was healthy enough and recovered in between treatments, you know, I would be able to spend time with my significant other. And so really these roles are important to think about when you're establishing a battle plan for how to approach things. Resource organizations, again, you know, there's great organizations right here in the Bay Area, like Cancer Commons, who does free consultations for all cancer patients. And they have amazingly brilliant PhDs who specialize and figuring out, what would be the optimal treatment paths for individual cancer patients. The Leukemia Lymphoma Society, who we partner with also, that does consultations for leukemia and blood cancer patients, and on and on. Oh, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. So it makes a lot of sense to me hearing your story, why you are so passionate about this issue now, and helping these people with these terminal illnesses or chronic illnesses. But I'm curious, what made you either aware or passionate about particularly children with leukemia, of all things, before you were diagnosed with it? Did I hear you correctly that you donated platelets? Or is it like, did you already have it?
I had no, it wasn't, how can I say, it wasn't a well thought out decision. I was essentially on a movie set. I did a lot of, small time acting, modeling, things like that before my diagnosis. And I did it, I basically modeled for clothes whenever I was asked to do that. And I'd been doing modeling since I was in my late teens. And I was on a movie set when somebody from the Red Cross, part of the movie set was, and I'm trying to remember the movie, I think it was called Mad City, and it was being filmed in downtown San Jose. And the Red Cross was doing a blood drive with all of the people involved in the movie production. And so I was at the blood drive, and it was one of the coordinators at the Red Cross that approached me and said, "Hey, you have B positive blood type." And I always thought it was cool that I had B positive blood type, but she said, there's a lot we have a bunch of kids with leukemia right now that are literally living day by day on donated blood, and they can't manufacture their own blood. They have leukemia, whatever, but they're going through treatment, whatever it is, but they need constant infusions of B positive blood. And we need like 30 to 50 volunteers a month per child, with the same type of blood to keep them infused daily with these blood products. And so they said, we'd love it if you come down and be part of our apheresis program and at the Red Cross. And so I started doing that back in the mid 90s, and I had been doing that for 6-7 years by the time I went in that one time for my monthly donation and was diagnosed with leukemia. So they didn't diagnose me of leukemia at the Red Cross. They flagged something wrong with my blood counts, and that sent me on an errand run to find out what was going on, and that's when I was diagnosed. But
wow.
Yeah.
So you were just doing that because it was an issue they had told you about that touched your heart, and you had no idea you would be on their side.
Talk about irony, right? And I think I put that word in the screen in the shots that I was sharing. But here I was going into the Red Cross for 6-7 years to donate platelets for kids with leukemia, and that was how I got diagnosed with leukemia myself. So it literally saved my life. If I hadn't, some people, that adult onset ALL does come on so fast and so heavy, because essentially it fills up your bone marrow with cancer before you even know what's going on. It can really take over your whole body within a week, and by the time you know what's going on, you've already died, or you've died, and they're figuring out what happened in an autopsy, that you basically just ran out of oxygen, or you didn't have any platelets, so you died of hemophilia within a couple of days, or you had internal bleeding, or you had some severe infection. It's almost like when you have ALL, you're dying of AIDS, hemophilia, and anemia all at the same time within a very short period of time. It's the most aggressive type of cancer there is, because it's a cancer of your immune system, and that's the fastest reproducing cells in your body.
Does that happen more often to people with certain blood types? Like I didn't know B positive was one of the coveted blood types, because I thought it was O negative was the most, and O positive the second most, or something.
Yeah, those are the universal blood types. So I'm not an expert on blood typing and everything. And as a matter of fact, when it comes to finding bone marrow matches and things, blood type it's way beyond blood typing. It's HLA, or human leukocyte antigen typing. So you know, I'm not exactly sure where blood type and donated blood products fit with different patients who have different blood types and things, but yeah, it is interesting. And B positive is not extremely rare. I think it's maybe 3 or 4% of the population has it, so it's considered rare but not extremely rare as a blood type. But anyway, yeah.
Thanks a lot, Eric. I just have a quick question, last question for me. I'm curious about how you think crowdfunding for healthcare is going to, you know, evolve in the future. Do you see us doing more of it? Do you see, how do you see it evolving, you know, let's say in the next 1 to 2 years, 1 to 3 years?
Well, I think it has evolved. Crowdfunding, when you're talking about a specific case, like somebody putting up a GoFundMe site and saying, "Hey, this is my medical issue, and there's only so much that insurance and whatever will cover, and it looks like I'm gonna have to travel outside of the country and do a treatment that my insurance won't pay for to do that." I think more and more people are understanding of that necessity, and there's been some very, very successful crowdfunding initiatives for patients. I mean, there's some patients have raised. As a matter of fact, we as the WeHeal Foundation, when we were raising money for individual patient cases, we raised upwards of $250,000 for one patient, I believe. So it all depended on how aggressive they were with their fundraising campaign. So I would imagine, and I don't know what's the percentage of campaigns on GoFundMe that are medically based, but I would say that it's got to be a good percentage.
Yeah.
And a lot of the crowdfunding sites that are out there are focused on helping people with medical issues and medical fights and that sort of thing. So I think it will keep evolving. It'll be interesting to see where it goes in the next couple of years.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So just a final question to kind of clarify from Michael's earlier question. Do you believe that finances are the main limiting factor in this, or is there some other main reason why a lot of people either don't know about or can't access crowdfunding and crowdsourcing for clinical trials?
Yeah, I mean, finance runs everything, right? So when you're talking about the whole system and the way that the system functions, the financial foundation is kind of behind all of it, but it's not necessarily an individual's financial limitations that are restricting them from getting the treatments they need. It's because first of all, clinical trials are generally free to all patients. As a matter of fact, a lot of patients are paid or compensated to participate in clinical trials, which often represent the latest, most advanced breakthroughs in medicine. So it's really about the way that we compensate our medical professionals and facilities in this country. They're compensated for doing procedures, for keeping patients in their billing system, for not necessarily curing them, but essentially keeping them in a chronic state of treatment. All right, so that's how they make the money, and that's not a good compensation structure. Because there's zero incentive for a doctor to say, "Hey, let me go find out what's going to be best for this individual patient and get them there." Because generally, again, if they're operating a private practice, generally they would be referring most of their patients somewhere else where there would be an optimal treatment for that patient, and they don't get compensated for doing that at all. So really, there's not only a lack of, but an opposite incentive to actually do that advocacy for a patient.
And would compensating them for referrals, would that cause corruption, or would that be a good solution? I mean, maybe that's
I think that would be there's all kinds of solutions we can talk to. We can talk to more outcome driven incentives for professionals. I mean, it really is a deeper question about how how things are paid for in our system and what medical professionals and facilities are, how they're compensated. But that discussion needs to happen. We could be doing a lot better. I know European systems have integrated outcome-based compensation programs. I mean, doctors get paid for keeping their patients well, not figuring out how to
Yeah, that's how it should be.
keep
Yeah.
keep treating them, right? Or whatnot.
Yeah.
So,
All right.
well,
thank you so much.
Go ahead, please.
Sharing, and just thank you for sharing your story, and for your time and all of that.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, there's a lot of things that initiatives we're working on with WeHeal that we could go into more